Good morning, children. Today's lesson, The Portrait of a Lady, for class 11. Today we'll take up questions and answers. The Portrait of a Lady, it is a revision session. What type of writing is the lesson, The Portrait of a Lady? Autobiography. The Portrait of a Lady is a part of an autobiography by Khushwant Singh. In this autobiography by Khushwant Singh, he draws a pen portrait. He draws a pen portrait of his. So here he draws a pen picture of his grandmother, old grandmother. Yes, he loves her immensely. He really loves his grandmother. She's so nice, kind, loving, caring. Okay, now let us move on to the theme of the story. In The Portrait of a Lady by Khushwant Singh. Always remember the name of the writer with correct spelling. We have the theme of innocence, friendship, love, connection, kindness, selflessness, respect, and acceptance. It is also noticeable that the narrator loves his grandmother very much, and if anything, both have a close and loving friendship. Yes, about the story now. The story is written in first person and is in biographical mode. It is a perception of Khushwant Singh of his grandmother through his own eyes. A very touching story that shows the special bond and connection between a boy and her granny. Granny means grandmother, and the changes which comes in the relationship as time passes by. For him, his grandmother was something close to idealism. Now, she's an ideal lady, and despite many differences in their likings, he always loved and respected her by heart. So, see, she does not like her grandson going to English school, learning science, English and all that. But still, they love each other. They have so much of respect for each other. Her love for him was also very deep. Not only that, the grandmother was an epitome of love and sacrifice, So grandmother was the epitome of love, sacrifice, which is highlighted as the main theme. The whole story revolves around her. She laid her heart not only for humans but also animals. She is very religious, but with the lapse of time, that means as time passed by, the grandmother is left alone, but she accepts then and never complains. So she accepts. So acceptance is her quality, and she never complains of loneliness. So acceptance of every situation that comes before you is another one. Thus the grandmother is also a strong woman, as she accepts whatever comes before her. After her peaceful death, the sparrows even mourned her death as they stopped. So after her death, the sparrows stopped chirping and they did not even eat the pieces of bread thrown before them. It highlights the change. So in relationship with the passage of time, everything in world is to be faced with courage. The grandmother was a strong woman. She did not express her emotions at the departure of author. Yes. What is the meaning of portrait of a lady? What is the meaning? The lesson is aptly titled The Portrait of a Lady because the author Khushwant Singh is intended it to be a character sketch of his grandmother. The word portrait is a word play on character sketch, and the grandmother of the author has numerous ladylike qualities. Character sketch of the grandmother, very important question. Grandmother was an old and short lady. Her face was covered with wrinkles. Why? Because she was old. She always wears white dress and take beads of rosary in her hands. Okay, she was very polite, kind lady. She was a very religious woman, telling the beads of her rosary. When narrator lived with her, so she was a polite and kind lady. When the narrator lived with her in village, she always fed dogs with stale chapatis. After coming to city, she was unable to feed dogs with chapatis because in city there are no dogs. Also, she cannot help the narrator in her studies because she cannot help the narrator in her studies. So she could not help the narrator because she did not know anything of science and English. She was sad to hear that there was no teaching about God and scriptures in narrator's school. She also thinks that music was not meant for gentle folk. Yeah, that means yes, good people should not learn music. But when narrator went abroad for his further studies, she felt very sad. Now she spent most of her time by spinning the wheel and praying. She fed the sparrows in her spare time. When she fed the sparrows, they sat on her head, hand, etc. and started chirping. They loved her. Yeah, when the narrator came from abroad, she felt happy and collected all the women of her neighborhood and started singing the homecoming of warriors. Due to overwork, that was too much of work, she developed fever. She told her family members that her end was near, that she was going to die. But the doctor said she would recover soon. She didn't spend time with her family members. Instead, she continued praying till she breathed her last. Moral of the story. In the portrait of the lady by Khushwant Singh, when the author Khushwant and his grandmother moved to the city, the turning point occurs in their lives. As a child, he was completely dependent upon his grandmother. But when they moved to a city, the grandmother no longer accompanied the narrator till the school and she was unable to help him with his studies because he would go by motor bus. The story is the author's grandmother's pen portrait. It determines the fact that a person who is truly religious stays composed and calm, generous and kind-hearted. Grandmother was a truly religious person and had compassion for all. That means she was so kind. The author through grandmother hits at the generation gap as referred by the grandmother. She opposed the idea of no teaching of scriptures, and to the music she had a particular antipathy. She did not like. The story portrays a grandson's perception of his grandmother and how their bond of love undergoes changes. Moral. The story puts light on the need of companionship and friendship felt by our elders. It also shows how love and emotion is experienced not only by human beings but animals and birds too. They also understand the language of love, the language of kindness. The portrait of a lady is first and foremost the sweet companionship of the grandmother and the author. The grandparents' old age is well spent. The children learn to take care of them. The author learns the basic education of life in his childhood from his grandmother, like being attended by her, going to school and attending the village dogs and feeding them, as he also feeds on the same stale chapatis. This teaches the compassion for animals. Later on, in his later years also, the grandmother teaches him by the example of her character. She is consistent in her work of spinning the wheel, counting the beads and praying. This type of character brings peace in the home. The author is very successful in his life, learning the basic ethics from his grandmother. So, that is all about the story. Elaborate on the beautiful bond of love and friendship between the author and his grandmother. So what kind of relationship did they share? Here's the answer. When the author was still young, his parents left for the city, leaving him to the care of his grandmother. So who took care of him? Grandmother. She took good care of the author. They were good friends. She woke him up each morning, bathed him, dressed him, plastered his wooden slate, gave him breakfast and walked him to school. So they would both walk together to school. While he sat in the veranda learning, the grandmother sat inside the temple reading scriptures, the religious scriptures. When they settled in city, they shared a common bedroom. When the writer was going abroad, she went to the railway station to see him off, but did not speak a word, only kissed his forehead. The writer cherished this as their last physical contact because he would be away for 5 years. As he was going away for 5 years, but his grandmother was there to receive him back. See? In the evening, she collected women from the neighborhood and beat the drum and sang for hours of the homecoming of the warriors. This was basically, she was trying to express her happiness. For the first time, she missed her prayers. The second question. The grandmother was not pretty but beautiful. That means she had that inner beauty. What's that inner beauty? She was loving, caring, affectionate. Okay, how? Answer. The grandmother was short, old, fat and slightly bent. Why bent? Because of old age. For the last 20 years, she looked the same. And to the author, she seemed to be too old to age further. It was difficult for him to imagine that she could have been young and pretty. Now, the author finds very difficult to even imagine that once upon a time she must have been very young, very pretty. But to him, she was beautiful in a pristine and peaceful way. He remembered her telling the beads of her rosary untiringly. She would keep doing that. Her silver locks lay scattered untidily over her pale, puckered face. Now, she's very old, and her lips constantly moved in an inaudible prayer. She would recite her prayers, but it was inaudible, not heard. She was like the winter landscape in the mountains, serene and content. See? In winter, what happens in the mountains? How is the landscape there? So it is very cold and all that. You see snow everywhere. But that has got its own charm, its own beauty. Gives so much of satisfaction, contentment. That symbolizes peace, calmness. So, grandmother, because of her age, she too is a symbol of serenity, contentment and beauty. Okay, the third question. Discuss the relevance of the title, The Portrait of a Lady. Is it suitable? You have to justify. If yes, why? Khushwant Singh draws a heartwarming pen portrait of his grandmother, whom he loved and admired. Though not pretty, she was beautiful to the author's perception, telling the beads of her rosary while her lips constantly moved in an inaudible prayer. She was like the winter landscape in the mountains. Just now I explained to you. She shared a special relationship, a bond of friendship, bond of love, yes, with the author. She got him ready and walked him to and from school. While he sat in the veranda learning, his grandmother sat inside the temple reading scriptures. The writer recounts his memories of his grandmother when he went abroad. Yeah. So, and how on his return she collected the women from the neighborhood and beat the drum and sang for hours together. That is how she was trying to express her happiness. For the first time, she missed her prayers. She was a pious soul who cared for the family and even dogs and sparrows. Her death was mourned by all, including the sparrows. The writer, through his portrayal, makes the old lady endearing and unforgettable. She had those qualities in her. Question number 4. From a foster mother in the village to a lonely old lady in the city, describe the grandmother's journey through the later part of her life. So let's have a look at the answer now. When Khushwant Singh was still young, his parents left for the city, leaving him to the care of his grandmother. They were good friends. His grandmother tended to him, got him ready and walked him to school. So while Khushwant Singh and the other children sat in the school's veranda learning, his grandmother sat inside the temple just next to the school reading scriptures, religious scriptures. In the city, their friendship underwent a change. The only thing that remained unchanged was their common bedroom. She could not accompany him to school because now he goes by motor bus. Remember, it's there in the story. As he went by the bus, his grandmother did not. So he went to school by bus. His grandmother did not understand or approve of his city education, and their communication deteriorated further. Later, when he went to the university, he got a separate room, and this severed their bond. Severing means it was broken, snapped. She then spent her day from sunrise to sunset at her spinning wheel. She sat spinning and reciting her prayers. You know that spinning wheel, you keep spinning it and you have to recite prayers. The Tibetans, I've seen the Tibetans do that. It was only in the afternoon that she relaxed for a while to feed the sparrows. Okay, children, now the next question. Write a character sketch of the author's grandmother using the following words: affectionate, caring, kind and benevolent, religious, strong woman. Answer. You have to use these adjectives for writing your answer. The author's grandmother was not pretty, but to the author she was a beautiful woman, an embodiment of serenity and contentment. She was a pious and religious lady who was always telling the beads of her rosary, and her lips constantly moved in inaudible prayer. She was affectionate and caring. She shared a special relationship with the author. She woke him up each morning, bathed him, dressed him, plastered his wooden slate, gave him breakfast and walked him to school. Her kindness and benevolence extended to the dogs and sparrows as well, whom she fed dutifully every day. She would do that. She was a strong woman who did not show any emotion when the author was going abroad, but when he returned, she collected women from the neighborhood and beat the drum and sang for hours together. Okay, now the next question. The grandmother herself was not formally educated, but was serious about the author's education. How does the text support this? The answer. The grandmother was not formally educated but was serious about the author's education. She could read the scriptures. She realized the value of education and did not let the author miss school. She woke him up each morning, bathed him, dressed him, plastered his wooden slate, gave him breakfast, took him to school where he was taught the alphabet and morning prayers. While he sat in the veranda learning, grandmother was sitting in the temple and she was busy reading the scriptures. Okay, in the city, she could not accompany him to school as he went by the school bus. So what happened? So when he grew up, that is when they were in the city, she could not accompany him. Why do you think so? Because he went by motor bus to school. He was now in an English medium school where they taught science, and this was not liked by the grandmother. You remember that, children? She could not understand English and did not believe in science. The fact that they were not taught about God made her very, very what? Unhappy. Khushwant Singh's music lessons in school upset her over its lewd associations. They were very indecent according to her. She took an interest in the author's education. So now question number 7. Gradually the author and the grandmother saw less of each other and their friendship was broken. Was the distancing deliberate or due to the demands of the situation? No, can't be deliberate. Yes, when the author was a young boy, his parents shifted to the city, leaving him with his grandmother. They were good friends. She was with him through the day and even accompanied him to and from school. But when his parents had settled in the city, they sent for them. This proved to be a turning point in their friendship. The only thing that remained unchanged was their common bedroom. She could not accompany him to school as he went by the school bus, the motor bus actually, children. He was now in an English school where they taught science. She could not understand English and did not believe in science. The fact that they were not taught about God made her unhappy. His music lessons were not liked by her. She was very much against that. But it was when he went to the university and got a separate room and their ties were severed further. That means broken. Severed means broken. As situations adversely affected their relationship. What was the happiest moment of the day for the grandmother? The happiest moment of the day for the grandmother was what? Yes, was when she was feeding the sparrows. They perched. Perched means they sat on her legs, shoulders and head, but she never shooed them away. Shooed them, drove them away. Okay, children? So, that's all for this session. Very important questions and answers. Go through the questions and answers.